We're kicking off today with Raw, as tomorrow will mark the Red Brand's long-awaited debut on Netflix, and despite this change, the show will remain on Monday nights. Since its launch in 1993, Raw has been on Mondays, despite stiff competition from the NFL, and staying on Mondays for Netflix was not a decision that was taken lightly. Speaking on the SI Media podcast with Jimmy Traina, Triple H shared that a lot of factors were considered when weighing up whether to keep Raw on Mondays or not. The game acknowledged battling the NFL, but added that the NFL is not a factor in a lot of the world, and also spoke of Raw being on Mondays as a tradition for over 30 years. We know Raw will be on Mondays, but there's been a lot of speculation about the show's length, especially after the Red Brand lost an hour and went down to 2 hours in late 2024. On the podcast, Triple H said that the show will be flexible and will be exactly as long as it needs to get its point across. He explained, "If this episode needs to be an hour, great, it's an hour. This next episode needs to be 42 minutes, it's 42 minutes. It's what makes for the best product. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to be 42 minutes, but clearly we'll deliver the product in a way that is best for Netflix and for their business model and what is best for our storytelling. These are unprecedented times for WWE, and fans are eager to see what unfolds, and time will tell whether we see Raws fluctuate between 3, 2, and 1 hour, or even shorter. But what do you think of all this? Are you opposed to shorter Raws, or does it make sense if the episode does what it needs to do? Let us know down in the comments." On this week's SmackDown, Tiffany Stratton cashed in her Money in the Bank contract, and many have seen her victory over Nia Jax as the start of a face turn. Fans were certainly pleased to see Stratton end Jax's reign as champion, but don't expect the new women's champion to come out shaking hands and kissing babies just yet. Chris Featherstone of Sportskeeda reports that Stratton has not been listed as a babyface on WWE's internal roster as of this time, despite her victory over Jax this week. This certainly raises the question as to what role Stratton will play moving forward, and whether she'll be a face, a heel, or in a tweener role as champion. What do you think of Tiffany Stratton's cash-in and her current status on the roster? Do you think this signals a character change? Share your thoughts and feedback below. Back to Raw's debut on Netflix, as top stars have already been announced for the show, and fans have been wondering whether The Rock could be making a surprise appearance. On Instagram, The Rock shared that later today he'll be in Los Angeles as a presenter for the Golden Globes, just one day before Raw's Netflix debut also comes to LA. Since Bad Blood, fans have been waiting to see The Rock return, and the fact that he'll be in the same city as Raw just one day before the debut on Netflix is certainly interesting for fans. Over to AEW Collision, and the show saw a trios match between Rated FTR and the Learning Tree, with both Canadian-led groups seeking to assert dominance. Jericho made fun of Cope backstage after the Rated R superstar talked more about the Death Riders than the Learning Tree in his interview, and that wasn't all that happened. FTR were able to keep the peace between the Rock and Roll Express and the Outrunners before heading out for the match, during which Cope found himself overwhelmed by the heels. That's possibly due to some ring rust, but FTR helped him find his footing, and the crowd picked up when Cope and Jericho tagged in, and the Learning Tree attempted a chop fest. Cope picked up the pace, and the Shatter Machine spear combo on Chris Jericho scored Rated FTR the win, but post-match, the Death Riders revealed that they had tied up the Rock and Roll Express. The Outrunners got beat down for trying to help before Jon Moxley and his crew escaped to end an action-packed main event that was the only match of the night to fully invest the crowd. That's despite the limited build, which means on paper, this shouldn't have been the most thrilling contest, and Jericho looked the best he had in a while, while Keith and Bill bumped well. It was surprising to see Jericho, the ROH World Champion, take the pin instead of one of his partners, and this result could set up anyone from Rated FTR as Jericho's next challenger. While it may not excite some hardcore AEW fans, Jericho vs. Cope is a big money match, as seen this week, as the early strength of the trios match was the history between the two. Down the stretch, Harwood carried the action to the delight of the crowd, and the only real disappointment was the post-match antics of the Death Riders. Tying up the Rock and Roll Express and running away without doing any damage hardly seemed impactful, and was more of a schoolyard prank than the act of AEW's biggest villains. Backstage at Collision, Hangman Page accused Christopher Daniels of not being there for him at World's End, and as one thing led to another, Page slapped the former EVP. As he was walking away, Daniels ran at Page and assaulted him from behind, kicking off a brawl between the two so vicious that Page was left with a cut over his face. Paige has been volatile in recent months, and it'll be interesting to see what's to come, and getting to see Daniels in the ring will certainly be a treat for the AEW audience. Are you excited at Paige feuding with Christopher Daniels? Where do you see their program going next after this week's show? Let us know below. Now, AEW has a locker room full of exciting stars, but as of late, two of those stars, Rush and Dralistico, have been dealing with backstage heat. That's according to Fightful Select, who report that the pair were originally set to defeat the Acclaimed on Collision that November, a win that would have secured them a spot at Full Gear. Plans changed following an altercation during their match with Richard Holliday and Alec Price, as Rush and Dralistico got physical with Holliday while he was being checked by a medic. This led to some backstage tension, which has since affected their standing in AEW, and we'll have to see whether their booking is affected whenever they return to TV. Do you think Rush and Dralistico deserve this backstage heat, or is this situation being blown out of proportion? Share your views on this matter down below. As we all know, CM Punk was fired from AEW in 2023 and has since made an impact in WWE once more, but it seems someone in Canada's USA Network isn't aware of this. Fans who used the service were certainly surprised, as AEW Collision's wallpaper for their slot on the channel guide in Canada shows CM Punk over a year since his termination. Collision was a show created with CM Punk in mind, as it allowed him to be on TV weekly without having to come face-to-face with the Elite or others he had issues with. What do you make of this unfortunate production error? Let us know in the comments. More from Collision, as even the help of Taya Valkyrie couldn't save Deonna Purrazzo from losing to Toni Storm, who extended her undefeated streak with an inside cradle. This was the second match in a row on Collision met with a quiet crowd, and Storm and Purrazzo needed to pick up the pace, but instead engaged in mostly basic offense. The two have delivered better in the past, but were surprisingly timid this week, and like the early days of her Timeless era, Storm is not in a position to deliver her best matches yet. It's a shame for Purrazzo, who rarely gets spotlights like this, and if Storm is not on point with this new gimmick yet, AEW should focus on the depth of the women's division instead. Storm needs time to find her footing, and there's also no excuse for Collision to have less than 2 women's matches a week, so this was not a good outing for the women of AEW. Speaking of women in AEW, the ring announcing crew added a notable name this week, as JoJo Offerman served as a ring announcer for a dark match ahead of Collision. After this dark match role, it remains to be seen if fans will see more of JoJo on TV, but the former WWE superstar/ring announcer certainly seemed at home in an AEW ring. 2025 is shaping up to be a year of change for WWE programming, and this week the promotion brought an end to the SmackDown Lowdown, a show that had been on since October of 2020. On Twitter, Scott Stanford, who hosted the show with Megan Morant, responded to a fan wondering where the latest show was, and he shared that the show had all wrapped up. WWE has a lot going on right now, but its production will no longer include the SmackDown Lowdown. And are you sad to see it go? Let us know below. At WrestleMania 24 in 2008, JBL faced Finlay in a brawl, during which he threw a trash can at Hornswoggle in a moment that lives on in the minds of fans. Now, 16 years later, Hornswoggle has once again been on the receiving end of a Bradshaw bin, as at a recent indie event, JBL recreated the spot, much to the delight of the crowd. JBL made waves in 2024 with his various appearances and aims to do the same in 2025, but Hornswoggle should think twice if he's offered a spot on a show JBL is booked for. And we're ending with Mick Foley, who recently showed up in OVW at their Nightmare Rumble event on January 4th, but did so as his Dude Love persona. With JBL on commentary, Foley delivered another blast from the past, Mr. Sacco, and this night was special as it marked 26 years to the day of his iconic first WWE title win. We'll have to see if Mick Foley ever makes his return to WWE for any reason. Triple H's leadership could always bring him back if the opportunity arises. If anything, it's great to see Mick having a good time in his retirement, as the Hall of Famer is still delivering Mr. Sacco and entertaining fans.